In the twilight of the modern age, when comfort has become the greatest enemy of human potential, there exists a fundamental truth that separates the conquerors from the conquered. This truth, whispered in the corridors of power and etched in the victories of history's most formidable figures, declares that weakness is not merely an absence of strength, it is an active poison that corrupts the soul and invites destruction. The world has grown soft, cushioned by conveniences that our ancestors could never have imagined. We live in an era where struggle has been systematized out of existence, where the sharp edges of necessity have been dulled by abundance, and where the very discomforts that once forged character have been eliminated in favor of ease. Yet within this comfortable prison, a select few recognize the danger. They understand that in a world that coddles weakness, those who cultivate strength become gods among mortals. This is not a tale of mere survival, but of dominance. It is the story of how one destroys the weak self that society encourages and nurtures the iron will that commands respect, fear, and, ultimately, victory. For the man who can eliminate his own weakness has achieved something far more powerful than external conquest. He has conquered the only enemy that truly matters, himself. The modern world presents us with a curious paradox. We have eliminated most forms of external hardship, yet internal weakness has proliferated like a disease. Men who have never faced genuine adversity crumble at the first sign of resistance. Women who have been told they are strong merely by virtue of existing discover their fragility when confronted with real opposition. Society has created a generation that confuses comfort with strength, safety with power, and compliance with wisdom. But those who understand the deeper currents of human nature recognize this weakness as an opportunity. In a world of the soft, the hard man reigns supreme. In a society of the comfortable, the one who has embraced discomfort holds all the advantages. The question is not whether you will face conflict is inevitable. The question is whether you will face it as a warrior or as prey. The philosophy that emerges from this understanding is not cruel for the sake of cruelty, nor harsh without purpose. It is the recognition that life itself is a contest, and that those who refuse to acknowledge this reality will be defeated by those who embrace it. This is the wisdom of Machiavelli, stripped of academic pretension and applied to the modern battlefield of human interaction. Consider the man who has never been tested. He moves through life with a false confidence built on untested assumptions. He believes in his own strength because he has never encountered true weakness. He trusts in his abilities because they have never been truly challenged. Such a man is not strong, he is merely untested. And, when the test inevitably comes, as it always does, he shatters like glass. Contrast this with the man who has systematically destroyed every weak part of himself. He has identified his fears and walked directly into them. He has found his limitations and shattered them through relentless effort. He has discovered his dependencies and severed them one by one. This man does not hope for strength, he has forged it in the fires of deliberate adversity. The process of destroying one's weak self is not pleasant. It requires a level of honest self-examination that most people find unbearable. It demands that you confront not just your obvious weaknesses, but the subtle forms of dependence and vulnerability that society teaches us to accept as normal. It means questioning every assumption about what you need, what you deserve, and what you can endure. Most men live their entire lives without ever truly knowing themselves. They mistake their reactions for their character, their habits for their nature, and their circumstances for their destiny. They are strangers to their own potential because they have never stripped away the layers of comfort and convenience that obscure their true capabilities. The man who would master his edge must begin with the uncomfortable recognition that everything he believes about himself may be wrong. The strength he thinks he possesses may be an illusion. The independence he claims may be dependence in disguise. The confidence he displays may be nothing more than the absence of testing. This recognition is not meant to destroy the ego, though it often does, but to reveal what lies beneath it. For underneath the false self, the weak self, the self that society has constructed through comfort and convenience, there exists something far more powerful. There exists the potential for a man who cannot be broken because he has already broken himself and rebuilt from the fragments. The rebuilding begins with the deliberate cultivation of hardship. Not hardship for its own sake, but strategic discomfort designed to reveal and eliminate weakness. This means choosing the difficult path when the easy one presents itself. It means embracing challenges that others avoid. It means systematically removing the crutches that support your weakest tendencies. Physical hardship is often the beginning, because the body is where we first encounter our limitations. The man who has never pushed his body to its absolute limits does not know what he is capable of. He lives within artificial boundaries created by comfort rather than real boundaries imposed by nature. When such a man is forced to perform beyond his comfort zone, he discovers reserves he never knew existed. But physical hardship is merely the foundation. The true work involves the systematic dismantling of psychological weaknesses. This means confronting the fears that govern your behavior, especially when those fears feel reasonable and justified. It means challenging the beliefs that limit your actions, particularly those beliefs that feel like wisdom rather than weakness. Fear of rejection drives men to seek approval from those who matter least. Fear of failure prevents them from attempting anything truly significant. Fear of loss makes them cling to things that should be released. Fear of discomfort keeps them trapped in situations that diminish their power. These fears feel protective, but they are actually chains that bind the spirit and limit potential. The man who would be undestroyable must systematically face each of these fears. Not to eliminate fear entirely, that is neither possible nor desirable, but to ensure that fear serves him rather than enslaves him. Fear becomes a tool when you have proven to yourself that you can act in spite of it. It becomes a weakness when it controls your actions and limits your choices. Dependency is another form of weakness that must be addressed. Modern society is built on interdependence, and, while cooperation has its place, excessive dependency creates vulnerability. The man who cannot feed himself, defend himself, think for himself, or survive on his own is at the mercy of others. This mercy may come freely for a time, but it always comes with a price, and that price is always power. The cultivation of self-sufficiency is not about rejecting all help or living in isolation. It is about ensuring that your cooperation with others comes from a position of strength rather than need. When you can survive without others, you can choose to work with them on your terms. When you cannot survive without them, you must accept their terms. This principle applies to every area of life. Financial dependency makes you vulnerable to economic manipulation. Emotional dependency makes you vulnerable to psychological control. Social dependency makes you vulnerable to the whims of the crowd. Physical dependency makes you vulnerable to those who provide for your needs. The strong man maintains his ability to stand alone, not because he wants to be alone, but because he understands that true partnership is only possible between equals. Dependency creates inequality, and inequality creates resentment, manipulation, and eventual conflict. As these weaknesses are systematically identified and eliminated, something remarkable begins to happen. The man discovers that much of what he thought was necessary was actually optional. Much of what he thought was impossible was actually inevitable once attempted. Much of what he feared was actually less dangerous than the weakness that prevented him from facing it. This discovery is the beginning of true power. For power is not the ability to control others, though that may be a consequence, but the ability to control oneself completely. It is the freedom that comes from having no weaknesses that others can exploit, no dependencies that others can manipulate, and no fears that others can use to constrain your actions. The man who has achieved this level of self-mastery presents a unique challenge to the world around him. He cannot be bought because he has eliminated his needs beyond the essentials. He cannot be threatened because he has already faced his fears. He cannot be manipulated because he understands his own motivations. He cannot be controlled because he has claimed complete ownership of his choices and their consequences. Such a man is dangerous to those who profit from weakness. He represents a standard that makes others uncomfortable with their own limitations. His very existence is a challenge to the comfortable lies that society tells itself about human nature and potential. He is living proof that the excuses others make for their failures are exactly that, excuses. The response of the weak to such strength is predictable. They will attempt to pull him down to their level through mockery, criticism, and social pressure. They will question his motives, attack his methods, and predict his failure. They will do everything in their power to convince him and themselves that his strength is actually weakness in disguise. This response is not malicious in intent, though it may be malicious in effect. The weak genuinely cannot comprehend strength that they have never cultivated. They mistake his discipline for rigidity, his self-sufficiency for antisocial behavior, and his refusal to accept limitations for arrogance. They see his strength through the lens of their own weakness and conclude that it must be false or unsustainable. The strong man's response to this pressure reveals the depth of his transformation. If he still harbors weakness, he will feel the need to justify himself, to explain his choices, or to seek validation for his path. But, if he has truly destroyed his weak self, these attacks become nothing more than weather, environmental conditions that he notes but does not allow to alter his course. For the man who has conquered himself understands a fundamental truth about human nature: people can only control what you allow them to control. They can only hurt what you give them the power to hurt. They can only manipulate what you have not yet claimed complete ownership of within yourself. This understanding transforms every interaction. Where others see obstacles, he sees training. Where others see threats, he sees opportunities to demonstrate his strength. Where others see impossible situations, he sees problems to be solved through the application of will, intelligence, and effort. The world begins to reshape itself around such a man. Not through magic or manipulation, but through the simple reality that strength attracts opportunity while weakness repels it. People begin to defer to his judgment because they recognize its quality. Opportunities begin to present themselves because he has proven his ability to execute. Resources begin to flow toward him because he has demonstrated his capacity to multiply them rather than merely consume them. This is not the result of luck or privilege, though those who witness it from the outside may convince themselves that it is. It is the natural consequence of eliminating the internal weaknesses that previously prevented such opportunities from being recognized and seized. When you are no longer afraid of failure, you can take calculated risks that others cannot. When you are no longer dependent on approval, you can make decisions based on their merit rather than their popularity. The transformation continues to deepen as external successes reinforce the internal work. Each victory proves that the weak self was indeed an imposter, a collection of limiting beliefs rather than accurate assessments of capability. Each challenge overcome demonstrates that the fears that once seemed rational were actually sophisticated forms of self-sabotage. But, perhaps most importantly, each step along this path makes retreat less appealing. The man who has tasted true strength finds weakness increasingly intolerable. Not just weakness in himself, but weakness as a philosophy, as an excuse, as a way of approaching life's inevitable challenges. He begins to see weakness clearly in all its forms: the colleague who complains but never acts, the friend who seeks comfort rather than growth, the society that prizes safety over strength. He understands that these people are not evil, but they are dangerous in their own way. Their weakness is infectious, their limitations are contagious, and their acceptance of mediocrity threatens to drag down anyone who associates with them too closely. This recognition leads to another crucial understanding: the company you keep shapes the man you become. If you surround yourself with weakness, you will find constant pressure to accommodate that weakness in yourself. If you surround yourself with strength, you will find constant encouragement to develop your own power. The strong man therefore becomes selective about his associations. Not from arrogance or cruelty, but from the recognition that his strength serves no one if it is diluted by constant accommodation of weakness. He may be generous with his knowledge, patient with those who genuinely seek to improve, and kind to those who cannot help their circumstances. But he does not allow the weak to set the terms of his existence or to define the boundaries of his potential. This selectivity extends beyond personal relationships to include sources of information, forms of entertainment, and ways of spending time. The man who has destroyed his weak self understands that everything he allows into his mind and environment either strengthens or weakens him. There is no neutral input; everything either builds or erodes the fortress of strength he has constructed. The news that focuses on problems without solutions weakens him by teaching helplessness. The entertainment that glorifies weakness weakens him by normalizing limitation. The conversations that center on complaints without action weaken him by reinforcing victim mentalities. The foods that prioritize pleasure over nutrition weaken him by indulging rather than strengthening his body. Conversely, information that expands his capabilities strengthens him. Entertainment that celebrates excellence strengthens him. Conversations that focus on solutions and growth strengthen him. Physical challenges that push his limits strengthen him. Each choice becomes an opportunity to either build or destroy the self he is creating. As this level of awareness develops, the man discovers that strength is not a destination but a direction. There is no point at which he can declare himself completely strong and cease his efforts. Strength must be maintained through constant vigilance and renewed daily through deliberate action. The moment he becomes comfortable with his current level of capability is the moment weakness begins its inevitable return. This understanding prevents the arrogance that destroys lesser men. He knows that his strength is earned rather than inherent, maintained rather than permanent, and demonstrated rather than declared. He has no interest in convincing others of his power, he is too busy developing it. He has no time for boasting about his achievements, he is too focused on creating new ones. The humility that comes from this recognition is not the false humility of weakness disguised as virtue. It is the genuine humility of someone who understands how much work true strength requires and how quickly it can be lost through neglect or complacency. It is the humility of someone who has faced his own limitations honestly and continues to face them every day. This humility makes him even more dangerous to those who would oppose him. They expect arrogance and find discipline. They expect boasting and find quiet confidence. They expect weakness disguised as strength and find actual power that requires no advertisement or justification. The combination of genuine strength and genuine humility creates a presence that is unmistakable to those who encounter it. It cannot be faked because it emerges from real capability rather than imagined superiority. It cannot be shaken because it is based on demonstrated performance rather than untested theory. As the first phase of this transformation nears completion, the man finds himself in possession of something rare and valuable, complete self-ownership. He belongs entirely to himself in a way that few people ever experience. His thoughts are his own, cleared of the conditioning that society imposed. His emotions are his own, freed from the manipulations that others attempted. His actions are his own, liberated from the fears and dependencies that once constrained them. This self-ownership is the foundation upon which all other power is built. For the man who owns himself completely can never truly be owned by another. He can choose to cooperate, to serve, to follow, or to lead, but these choices come from strength rather than weakness, from abundance rather than need. The weak man serves because he must, he has no choice. The strong man serves because he chooses to, and that choice can be withdrawn at any moment. This distinction changes everything about the nature of his relationships and the dynamics of his interactions with the world. Power recognizes power, and, as word of his transformation spreads through subtle channels, he begins to attract the attention of others who have walked similar paths. These are not the weak seeking salvation, but the strong seeking equals. They understand what he has accomplished because they have accomplished something similar themselves. These relationships are different from any he has known before. They are based on mutual respect rather than mutual need, on shared strength rather than shared weakness. They involve challenge rather than comfort, growth rather than stagnation, and honest assessment rather than flattering deception. Through these relationships, he discovers that he has joined a select fraternity that exists within but separate from ordinary society. These are the men and women who have refused to accept the limitations that others imposed upon them. They are the ones who have systematically eliminated their weaknesses and cultivated their strengths. They are the ones who understand that true power comes from self-mastery rather than the domination of others. This fraternity has no formal membership, no official meetings, and no written rules. But its members recognize each other instantly through the quality of their presence, the depth of their confidence, and the reality of their achievements. They speak a common language of strength and understand the price that true power requires. In their company, he discovers new levels of challenge and growth. For these people do not accept mediocrity from each other any more than they accept it from themselves. They demand excellence, expect competence, and recognize achievement. In their presence, he is called to be his strongest self not through external pressure but through the natural dynamics of strength attracting and developing more strength. As this first phase of transformation concludes, the man stands at a threshold. He has successfully destroyed the weak self that society cultivated and has begun to construct the strong self that his potential demanded. He has eliminated the major weaknesses that made him vulnerable to external control and has developed the basic strengths that allow him to control his own destiny. But this is only the beginning. For true mastery requires not just the elimination of weakness and the cultivation of personal strength, but the strategic application of that strength in the complex arena of human interaction. It requires understanding not just himself, but others. Not just his own power, but the dynamics of power itself. The foundation has been laid. The weak self has been destroyed. The strong self has begun to emerge. Now comes the true test, the application of this strength in a world that rewards the cunning as often as the strong, that punishes the naive regardless of their power, and that demands strategic thinking as much as raw capability. The man who has mastered himself must now learn to navigate the treacherous waters of human nature, to apply his strength with wisdom, and to build upon his personal victory a legacy that extends beyond himself. For individual strength, no matter how complete, is ultimately limited in its impact. True dominance requires the ability to influence others, to shape circumstances, and to create realities that serve his vision. This is where the teachings of Machiavelli become not just relevant but essential. For Machiavelli understood what many strong men fail to grasp, that strength without strategy is ultimately self-defeating, that power without wisdom destroys itself, and that the man who can conquer himself but cannot navigate others will find his strength turned against him by those who are weaker but more cunning. The journey continues, but the foundation is solid. The weak self has been destroyed and cannot be resurrected. What remains is to build upon that destruction something magnificent, something that can not only survive in a hostile world but can reshape that world according to its will. The next phase awaits, and, with it, the true test of everything that has been learned, built, and sacrificed to reach this point. The man stands ready, no longer vulnerable to the weaknesses that once defined him, but not yet master of the strategic applications that will define his ultimate success or failure. The real game is about to begin. The man who has conquered himself stands at the precipice of true power, but he quickly discovers that personal mastery is merely the entry fee to a far more complex and dangerous game. The world is filled with others who possess various forms of power, inherited wealth, institutional authority, social connections, intellectual gifts, or simple cunning. Some of these people are allies to be cultivated, others are obstacles to be overcome, and still others are predators to be neutralized. Understanding the difference and responding appropriately is the essence of strategic thinking. Machiavelli's greatest insight was not that men are inherently evil, though some certainly are, but that they are inherently self-interested and will act according to their perception of advantage. This understanding liberates the strategic mind from the burden of expecting nobility from those who lack it and the disappointment that follows such naive expectations. Instead, it allows for accurate assessment of motivations, realistic prediction of behavior, and effective planning based on how people actually are rather than how we might wish them to be. The strong man who fails to understand this principle will find his strength turned against him by those who understand it perfectly. He will be manipulated by those who recognize his honest nature, exploited by those who prey upon his good intentions, and defeated by those who play by different rules than the ones he has imposed upon himself. Strength without strategic awareness is like a powerful engine without a steering wheel, capable of tremendous force but ultimately self-destructive. The first lesson in strategic dominance is the recognition that most people operate from a position of hidden weakness, even when they appear strong. The wealthy man who cannot bear to lose his fortune is weak. The powerful official who cannot survive without his position is weak. The popular individual who cannot function without approval is weak. These weaknesses are often carefully concealed, but they are always present, and they represent both vulnerabilities to be exploited and lessons to be learned. Understanding these hidden weaknesses allows the strategic mind to see through surface appearances to underlying realities. The blustering man who threatens loudly often does so because he lacks the power to act quietly. The individual who constantly seeks to impress others usually doubts his own value. The person who claims to need nothing from others typically needs everything but has learned to disguise this fact. This insight must be applied first to oneself. The man who has destroyed his obvious weaknesses must remain vigilant for the subtle forms that weakness can take as it retreats deeper into the psyche. Pride in one's strength can become a weakness if it prevents accurate assessment of threats. Confidence in one's abilities can become a weakness if it leads to carelessness or overreach. Even the discipline that enabled his transformation can become a weakness if it becomes rigid rather than adaptive. The truly strategic mind maintains constant awareness of its own potential vulnerabilities while systematically identifying and cataloging the weaknesses of others. This is not done with malicious intent, though it may be applied with ruthless efficiency when necessary, but with the understanding that information is power and that ignorance is the most dangerous weakness of all. Once these patterns of weakness and strength become clear, the next phase involves learning to influence the behavior of others without revealing one's own hand. This is perhaps the most sophisticated skill in the strategic arsenal, because it requires understanding not just what people want, but why they want it, how they think they can get it, and what they are willing to sacrifice to obtain it. The crude approach to influence involves direct confrontation, threatening punishment, or promising rewards in obvious ways. This approach sometimes works, but it also reveals one's position, creates resentment, and invites retaliation. The sophisticated approach involves creating circumstances where others choose to do what you want them to do, believing that the choice is their own and serves their own interests. This requires a deep understanding of human psychology and the patience to work through indirect channels. It means planting ideas rather than imposing them, creating opportunities rather than demanding compliance, and shaping environments rather than controlling people directly. The most effective influence is the kind that leaves its targets believing they have made independent decisions that happen to align with your objectives. Consider the employee who resents his position but lacks the courage to leave. Direct pressure will only increase his resentment and might drive him to desperate actions. But creating circumstances where staying becomes more attractive, perhaps through new responsibilities that align with his interests or recognition that feeds his ego, achieves the desired result while building loyalty rather than resentment. Or consider the competitor who threatens your position in the market. Direct confrontation might lead to a destructive war that benefits neither party. But identifying what that competitor truly wants, perhaps respect from his peers or financial security, allows for strategic responses that either neutralize the threat or convert an enemy into an ally. The key principle underlying all sophisticated influence is reciprocity. People feel obligated to return favors, to respect those who respect them, and to support those who support them. But this reciprocity can be cultivated and directed by someone who understands its mechanisms. The favor that costs little but means much, the respect that is given strategically rather than automatically, the support that is timed for maximum impact, these become tools for building networks of obligation and loyalty. However, reciprocity works both ways, and the strategic mind must be careful not to become trapped by obligations that serve others' interests rather than his own. The favor that seems generous may carry hidden costs. The alliance that appears beneficial may include restrictive terms. The opportunity that looks attractive may be designed to create dependency. Maintaining strategic advantage requires the ability to build and dissolve relationships based on their current utility rather than past sentiment or future promises. This approach may seem cold to those who operate primarily from emotional impulses, but it is actually more honest than the alternative. The person who maintains relationships only when they serve mutual benefit is more reliable than the one who makes promises based on temporary emotions that may not endure. The strategic mind does not pretend that personal relationships can be separated from personal interests, it simply acknowledges this reality and operates accordingly. The application of these principles extends to every area of human interaction. In professional environments, the strategic mind identifies the real decision-makers versus the apparent ones, the information channels that matter versus those that are merely formal, and the motivations that drive behavior versus the reasons that are publicly stated. This knowledge allows for more effective communication, better targeting of efforts, and superior outcomes in negotiations and collaborations. In social situations, the strategic mind recognizes status hierarchies, alliance patterns, and influence networks that are invisible to less observant individuals. This awareness prevents wasted effort on relationships that cannot be productive while highlighting opportunities that others miss. It also provides protection against social manipulation by those who understand these dynamics but use them for destructive purposes. In personal relationships, strategic thinking does not mean treating friends and family as mere tools to be manipulated. Rather, it means understanding that even the closest relationships involve elements of exchange and influence, and that acknowledging this reality allows for more honest and, ultimately, more satisfying connections. The strategic mind gives value to receive value, supports others to earn support, and builds trust through consistent demonstration of reliability rather than empty promises of loyalty. As these skills develop, the strategic mind begins to operate on multiple levels simultaneously. While engaging in surface conversations and apparent activities, it is constantly gathering information, testing hypotheses, and adjusting plans based on new data. This does not require deception, though it may involve discretion, but it does require mental discipline and emotional control that most people never develop. The ability to maintain this level of strategic awareness while appearing natural and spontaneous is itself a form of power. It allows the strategic mind to operate in any environment without revealing its true capabilities or intentions. Others may sense that something is different about such an individual, but they cannot identify exactly what it is or how to counter it. This ambiguity is deliberately cultivated and strategically valuable. The person whose capabilities are fully known can be planned against effectively. The person whose intentions are completely transparent can be manipulated through those intentions. But the individual who maintains some level of mystery forces others to guess, and people who are guessing are at a disadvantage compared to people who know. The cultivation of this strategic ambiguity requires careful management of information flow. Some truths should be shared openly to build trust and demonstrate honesty. Other truths should be shared selectively to reward loyalty and create inner circles. Still other truths should be guarded completely to maintain advantage and prevent exploitation. This information management extends beyond personal secrets to include capabilities, plans, resources, and relationships. The wise strategist reveals strength when it serves his purposes to deter threats or attract allies, but conceals it when revelation would invite attacks or create unnecessary competition. He shares his plans when doing so builds commitment from others, but keeps them private when premature disclosure would allow interference or sabotage. The timing of revelations becomes as important as their content. Information released too early may be used against you. Information released too late may be dismissed as irrelevant. But information released at precisely the right moment can achieve maximum impact with minimum risk. This sophisticated approach to information management naturally leads to the development of multiple relationships with varying degrees of intimacy and trust. The strategic mind does not treat all people equally; such treatment would be both ineffective and dishonest. Instead, it creates concentric circles of relationship, with different levels of access and different types of exchange appropriate to each level. The outermost circle consists of casual acquaintances and professional contacts, people who may be useful for specific purposes but who should not be trusted with sensitive information or relied upon for important support. The relationship is cordial but surface level, defined by clear exchanges rather than emotional bonds. The next circle includes more substantial relationships, colleagues, neighbors, and social contacts who have proven their reliability in limited contexts. These relationships involve more trust and more mutual support, but still maintain clear boundaries and realistic expectations about what each party will do for the other. The inner circle consists of close friends and allies who have demonstrated their loyalty and competence over time. These are the people who can be trusted with important information, relied upon for significant support, and included in plans that require coordination and discretion. Even here, however, the strategic mind maintains awareness that circumstances can change relationships and that eternal loyalty is rare among human beings. At the center lies the most exclusive circle, perhaps only family members or a very few individuals who have proven their commitment through extreme tests. These are the relationships where strategic calculation gives way to genuine emotional bond, though even here the wise individual remains alert to changes that might alter the dynamics. This structure is not rigid or manipulative, it simply reflects the reality that different relationships serve different purposes and require different approaches. The mistake that many people make is either treating everyone as an enemy, paranoid isolation, or treating everyone as a close friend, naive vulnerability. The strategic approach recognizes that most relationships fall somewhere between these extremes and should be managed accordingly. As these relationship networks develop, they begin to create compound effects that multiply the strategic mind's effective power. Information flows in from multiple sources, providing early warning of threats and advance notice of opportunities. Support becomes available from various directions, reducing dependence on any single source. Influence extends through indirect channels, allowing for subtle manipulation of circumstances without direct involvement. These networks must be maintained through consistent attention and reciprocal value creation. Relationships that are only drawn upon but never contributed to will eventually fade or turn hostile. The strategic mind therefore invests time and resources in maintaining its networks, but does so efficiently, providing maximum value with minimum expenditure. The coordination of these networks requires sophisticated planning and execution. Different contacts may provide conflicting information that must be reconciled. Various allies may have incompatible interests that must be balanced. Multiple opportunities may present themselves simultaneously, requiring difficult choices about resource allocation. The strategic mind approaches these challenges systematically, using proven decision-making frameworks rather than relying on instinct or emotion. It gathers all available information, identifies the key variables and constraints, evaluates potential outcomes based on realistic assumptions, and selects courses of action that optimize long-term advantage rather than short-term gain. This analytical approach extends to the evaluation of risks and opportunities. The strategic mind does not seek to eliminate all risk. Such an approach would also eliminate most opportunities. Instead, it seeks to understand risks completely, to minimize unnecessary exposure, and to ensure that potential rewards justify the dangers involved. Some risks are worth taking because the potential gains are enormous and the probability of success is high. Other risks should be avoided because the potential losses are catastrophic regardless of the probability. Most situations fall between these extremes and require careful calculation of expected values based on realistic assessments of both positive and negative outcomes. The ability to make these calculations accurately and quickly becomes a significant competitive advantage in environments where others are paralyzed by uncertainty or driven by emotional impulses. While competitors are debating whether to act, the strategic mind has already evaluated the situation and begun implementation. While others are reacting to events after they occur, the strategic mind has anticipated developments and positioned itself accordingly. This predictive capability emerges from pattern recognition developed through careful observation of human behavior over time. The strategic mind notices that certain types of people respond to certain types of situations in predictable ways. It recognizes that particular combinations of circumstances tend to produce specific outcomes. It understands that individual behavior, while variable in details, follows broader patterns that can be identified and exploited. These patterns exist at multiple levels: individual psychology, group dynamics, institutional behavior, and market forces. The strategic mind learns to read these patterns simultaneously, understanding how they interact and influence each other. This systems thinking approach provides insights that are invisible to those who focus on only one level at a time. For example, an individual's personal ambitions may conflict with the stated goals of the organization he works for, creating opportunities for strategic intervention. A group's desire for consensus may prevent them from making necessary but unpopular decisions, creating space for external influence. An institution's commitment to established procedures may blind them to changing circumstances, creating competitive advantages for more adaptive opponents. Understanding these multi-level dynamics allows the strategic mind to identify leverage points where small inputs can produce large outputs. Instead of applying force directly against strong resistance, it finds ways to redirect existing forces or to create circumstances where others do the work of achieving its objectives. This principle of leverage extends beyond human systems to include technological, financial, and informational resources. The strategic mind seeks to control assets that provide disproportionate influence: communication channels, regulatory relationships, technical expertise, or financial mechanisms that others depend upon but do not fully understand. The accumulation of these leverage points over time creates what might be called strategic depth: multiple ways to achieve objectives, multiple defenses against threats, and multiple sources of power that complement and reinforce each other. This depth provides resilience against specific attacks and flexibility in responding to changing circumstances. As the strategic mind develops this depth, it also develops the confidence that comes from knowing that single failures cannot destroy overall position. This confidence, in turn, enables more aggressive pursuit of opportunities because the fear of failure no longer constrains action. The strategic mind can take calculated risks that others cannot because it has built sufficient redundancy to survive occasional losses. This willingness to accept tactical losses in pursuit of strategic gains is perhaps the most difficult skill for most people to develop. The emotional impulse is to avoid all losses, to win every battle, and to never admit defeat. But the strategic mind understands that some battles must be lost to win the war, some immediate gains must be sacrificed to achieve larger objectives, and some apparent defeats actually represent strategic victories. The ability to think in these longer time horizons and larger scales separates the strategic mind from the merely tactical. Tactics focus on immediate effectiveness in specific situations. Strategy focuses on overall positioning across multiple situations over extended time periods. The tactical thinker optimizes for current circumstances. The strategic thinker shapes future circumstances to his advantage. This temporal dimension of strategic thinking requires patience and discipline that most people lack in our instant gratification culture. The strategic mind may spend years building relationships that will pay off in critical moments. It may invest resources in capabilities that have no immediate application but will prove essential when circumstances change. It may position itself in markets or locations that are currently unprofitable but will become valuable as trends develop. This long-term orientation also influences how the strategic mind responds to current challenges and opportunities. Instead of asking, "How can I solve this problem now?" it asks, "How can I solve this problem in a way that improves my position for future challenges?" Instead of seeking immediate rewards, it seeks sustainable advantages. The compound effects of this approach become more apparent over time. While others are repeatedly starting over because they optimized for short-term gains that proved unsustainable, the strategic mind is building upon previous successes to achieve increasingly ambitious objectives. The gap between strategic and non-strategic thinking widens with each cycle of decision-making and implementation. As this gap widens, the strategic mind finds itself operating in a different reality from most people around it. It sees opportunities where others see only problems. It recognizes patterns where others see only random events. It understands connections where others see only isolated incidents. This enhanced perception brings both advantages and challenges. The advantages are obvious: superior decision-making, better outcomes, and increased power. The challenges are more subtle but equally important. Operating at this level requires constant mental energy and emotional discipline. It can create distance from others who operate at more basic levels. It can lead to arrogance or cynicism if not balanced by wisdom and humility. The strategic mind must therefore develop not just analytical capabilities but also the emotional intelligence to manage its own psychology and maintain productive relationships with others who may not share its sophistication. This requires a form of code switching, the ability to operate strategically when necessary while still connecting authentically with others when appropriate. This balance becomes especially important as the strategic mind's successes begin to attract attention from others who may seek to either learn from it or destroy it. Success creates visibility, and visibility creates both opportunities and threats. The strategic mind must learn to manage its reputation as carefully as it manages its actual capabilities. The next phase of development therefore involves scaling the lessons learned from personal transformation and strategic thinking to the broader challenge of building and maintaining power in complex social, economic, and political environments. This requires understanding not just individual psychology but institutional dynamics, market forces, and the deeper currents that shape human civilization. The foundation has been built. Personal weakness has been eliminated. Strategic thinking has been developed. Networks have been established. Now comes the ultimate test, the application of all these capabilities in the pursuit of objectives that extend beyond immediate self-interest to the creation of lasting impact and enduring legacy. This is where strategy becomes statesmanship, where power becomes leadership, and where the man who has mastered himself begins to shape the world around him according to his vision and values. The man who has mastered himself and developed strategic thinking capabilities now faces his greatest challenge and his ultimate opportunity. Having eliminated personal weaknesses and learned to navigate human nature, he must decide what to build with the power he has accumulated. This decision will determine not only his own legacy but his impact on the world around him. Many who reach this level of development make the mistake of believing that power is an end in itself. They accumulate influence for the sake of influence, control for the sake of control, and dominance for the sake of dominance. Such men often achieve impressive short-term results, but their empires crumble because they were built on foundations of ego rather than principle, fear rather than respect, and coercion rather than genuine value creation. The truly great understand that power is a tool, not a goal. They recognize that lasting influence comes from building systems, institutions, and cultures that continue to operate according to their vision long after their direct involvement ends. They seek not just to dominate their current environment, but to shape future environments in ways that reflect their values and serve their long-term objectives. This transformation from power seeker to power builder represents the final evolution of the strong man. It requires moving beyond personal advantage to encompass broader considerations of value creation, institutional design, and cultural influence. It demands thinking not just in terms of what can be taken from the existing system, but what can be built to replace or improve that system. The foundation for this transformation lies in understanding the difference between personal power and systemic power. Personal power depends entirely on the individual who wields it, his presence, his energy, his continued involvement in decision-making. When he dies or retires or loses interest, his power dies with him. Systemic power, by contrast, is embedded in structures, processes, and cultures that operate independently of any single individual. Consider the difference between a dictator and a founding father. The dictator rules through personal authority, his word is law because he has the strength to enforce it. But when the dictator dies, his power dies with him, often leaving chaos and civil war in its wake. The founding father, by contrast, creates institutions, constitutions, legal systems, cultural norms that continue to function according to his vision even after he is gone. The transition from personal to systemic power requires a fundamental shift in thinking. Instead of asking, how can I control this situation, the question becomes, how can I create a system that will produce the outcomes I desire without requiring my constant intervention? Instead of focusing on immediate compliance, the focus shifts to long-term alignment of incentives and values. This shift begins with the recognition that true power comes from creating value for others rather than simply extracting it from them. The man who enriches himself by impoverishing others has built a foundation that will ultimately collapse as his victims organize against him or find alternatives to his services. But the man who enriches himself by enabling others to prosper has created a foundation of mutual interest that grows stronger over time. This principle applies at every level of interaction. The employer who creates genuine opportunity for advancement builds loyalty that cannot be purchased with money alone. The leader who develops the capabilities of his followers creates a team that will continue to execute his vision even when he is not present to direct them. The entrepreneur who solves real problems for customers builds a business that will thrive as long as those problems exist. The strategic mind approaches value creation systematically, identifying genuine needs that are not being met effectively by existing solutions. This requires deep understanding of the gap between what people want and what they are currently receiving, between what problems exist and what solutions are available, between what potential exists and what is actually being realized. These gaps represent opportunities not just for profit but for genuine impact. The man who can bridge these gaps effectively creates value for others while building power for himself. The key is to ensure that the value created is real rather than imaginary, sustainable rather than temporary, and aligned with long-term trends rather than short-term fads. Once these opportunities are identified, the next step involves designing systems that can capture and deliver value efficiently and reliably. This requires understanding principles of organizational design, process optimization, and incentive alignment that most people never study but that determine the success or failure of all human enterprises. The most important principle is that systems tend to produce the behaviors they reward and discourage the behaviors they punish. If you want honest reporting from subordinates, you must create consequences that make honesty more beneficial than deception. If you want innovation from your team, you must structure rewards that favor creative risk-taking over safe conformity. If you want customer loyalty, you must ensure that serving customer interests is more profitable than exploiting them. Many systems fail because their designers assumed that people would behave according to idealistic motivations rather than realistic self-interest. They created structures that depended on goodwill, public spirit, or moral obligation to function properly. When these noble motivations proved insufficient, as they inevitably do, the systems broke down or became corrupted. The strategic mind designs systems that assume people will act according to their perceived self-interest and, then, aligns those interests with the desired outcomes. This is not cynicism but realism. It recognizes that while people are capable of nobility, they are not reliably noble, and that sustainable systems must account for human nature as it actually is rather than as we might wish it to be. This alignment of interests must be built into the fundamental structure of any organization or institution. It cannot be imposed from above through rules and regulations. Such imposed solutions create compliance rather than commitment and tend to break down under stress. Instead, it must emerge from the logical consequences of participation in the system. Consider the design of a business organization. Traditional hierarchical structures often create incentives for political maneuvering, information hoarding, and departmental competition that works against overall organizational success. But a well-designed structure can create incentives for cooperation, knowledge sharing, and alignment around common objectives. The key is to ensure that individual success is impossible without contributing to collective success. This might involve profit-sharing arrangements that tie personal compensation to overall organizational performance. It might include cross-training programs that require departments to understand and support each other's functions. It might involve transparent communication systems that make information hoarding counterproductive. These structural solutions work because they make the desired behavior the most rational choice for participants. People cooperate not because they are forced to, but because cooperation serves their own interests better than conflict. They share information not because they are required to, but because sharing information increases their own influence and effectiveness. The same principles apply to larger social and political institutions. The most stable and effective governments are those that create structures where serving the public interest becomes the most reliable path to personal advancement. The most prosperous economies are those that reward wealth creation rather than wealth extraction. The most peaceful societies are those that provide legitimate channels for resolving disputes and advancing interests. Building such institutions requires understanding both the immediate needs they must serve and the long-term forces that will shape their evolution. The strategic mind thinks not just about current problems but about how those problems will change as technology advances, populations shift, and cultural values evolve. This long-term perspective is essential because institutions, once established, are difficult to modify. The legal frameworks, organizational structures, and cultural norms that are created today will constrain and enable actions for decades or even centuries into the future. The strategic mind therefore invests considerable effort in getting the fundamental design right from the beginning. This requires studying successful models from history and other contexts, understanding the principles that made them work, and adapting those principles to current circumstances. It also requires anticipating future challenges and building in flexibility that will allow the institution to evolve without losing its essential character. The process of institutional design is itself a form of strategic thinking that operates at a higher level than individual tactics or even organizational strategy. It requires understanding systems theory, historical patterns, and the deep drivers of human behavior. It demands patience for long-term results and the ability to work through others to achieve objectives that exceed any individual's capacity. As the strategic mind engages in this work, it discovers that building institutions requires different skills than building personal power. Personal power can be achieved through individual excellence and strategic maneuvering. Institutional power requires the ability to inspire others, to communicate vision effectively, and to create shared commitment to objectives that may not be achieved for years or decades. This shift from individual to institutional thinking also requires different approaches to leadership. The leader who seeks only personal advancement can rely on manipulation and coercion to achieve short-term compliance. But the leader who seeks to build lasting institutions must earn genuine loyalty and commitment from those who will carry the work forward. This genuine leadership emerges from competence, character, and vision. Competence demonstrates the ability to achieve stated objectives and provides confidence that following this leader will lead to success. Character demonstrates commitment to principles beyond immediate self-interest and provides assurance that the leader will not sacrifice followers for personal gain. Vision provides meaning and direction that transcends individual concerns and connects people to purposes larger than themselves. These leadership qualities cannot be faked or manipulated into existence. They must be developed through consistent demonstration over extended periods. They require the leader to hold himself to higher standards than he expects from others and to accept responsibility for failures while sharing credit for successes. The strategic mind approaches leadership development systematically, identifying the specific capabilities required for the particular challenges he faces and, then, acquiring those capabilities through study, practice, and mentorship. This might involve developing public speaking skills to communicate vision effectively, studying historical examples of successful institution building, or finding mentors who have achieved similar objectives in other contexts. As these leadership capabilities develop, they enable the strategic mind to work through others to achieve objectives that would be impossible through individual effort alone. This multiplication of capability is the essence of true power, the ability to extend one's influence far beyond one's direct reach through the aligned efforts of others who share commitment to common objectives. This process of influence multiplication begins with careful selection of the people who will be most critical to institutional success. The strategic mind does not simply choose those who are most talented or most available, but those who combine talent with character and commitment. These are the people who will maintain standards when oversight is impossible, who will make good decisions in unexpected circumstances, and who will continue the work even when it becomes difficult or unpopular. Finding such people requires sophisticated assessment capabilities. Surface indicators, credentials, charisma, initial enthusiasm are often misleading. The qualities that matter most, integrity under pressure, persistence through setbacks, wisdom in complex situations, can only be evaluated through careful observation over time and in challenging circumstances. The strategic mind therefore creates testing situations that reveal character and capability. These might involve delegating challenging projects with minimal supervision, presenting ethical dilemmas that test commitment to principles, or introducing unexpected obstacles that require creative problem solving. The responses to these tests provide far more reliable information about suitability for critical roles than any interview or reference check. Once the right people are identified and recruited, they must be developed systematically. This development goes beyond technical training to include education in the principles and values that will guide the institution, exposure to the historical context that shapes its mission, and preparation for the challenges they will face as the institution grows and evolves. This educational process is itself a form of strategic investment. The time and resources devoted to developing people properly will be repaid many times over through better decisions, stronger execution, and reduced need for direct oversight. More importantly, it ensures that the institution's values and methods will be preserved and transmitted as it expands beyond the founder's direct involvement. The development of institutional culture deserves special attention because culture ultimately determines behavior more powerfully than rules or procedures. Culture consists of shared assumptions about what is important, how things should be done, and what constitutes success or failure. These assumptions shape perception, influence decision-making, and guide behavior even when no explicit guidance has been provided. The strategic mind approaches culture creation deliberately rather than leaving it to develop accidentally. This involves modeling the behaviors and attitudes that should become standard, telling stories that illustrate important principles, and creating rituals and traditions that reinforce desired values. It also involves addressing quickly any behaviors or attitudes that conflict with the intended culture, before they can spread and become normalized. Culture creation is particularly challenging because it requires consistency over extended periods. A single dramatic contradiction between stated values and actual behavior can undo years of careful culture building. The leader must therefore hold himself to the same standards he expects from others and must be willing to make difficult decisions that demonstrate commitment to principles even when they are costly in the short term. As the institution grows and its culture becomes established, the strategic mind faces new challenges related to scale and sustainability. What works for a small organization may fail when that organization grows larger. Informal communication systems that function well among dozens of people become inadequate when dealing with hundreds or thousands. Decision-making processes that rely on personal relationships must be systematized to handle increased volume and complexity. The strategic mind anticipates these scaling challenges and prepares for them by building systems that can evolve rather than simply expand. This might involve creating modular organizational structures that can be replicated as growth occurs, establishing communication protocols that can handle increased information flow, or developing training programs that can maintain quality standards as hiring accelerates. Sustainability also requires attention to succession planning from the very beginning. The institution must be designed to survive and thrive under different leadership with different personalities and capabilities. This means creating systems that do not depend on any individual's unique characteristics and developing multiple people who could take over critical functions if necessary. This preparation for succession is perhaps the ultimate test of the strategic mind's commitment to building lasting power rather than merely accumulating personal influence. It requires the humility to recognize that the institution is more important than its founder and the wisdom to step back when doing so serves the larger objectives. The strategic mind that successfully builds sustainable institutions discovers that it has achieved something far more valuable than personal power. It has created a legacy that will continue to shape the world long after its creator is gone. It has demonstrated that individual strength, properly applied, can transform not just personal circumstances but entire systems of human organization. This transformation from personal strength to institutional impact represents the highest expression of the principles that began with the destruction of the weak self. The man who eliminated his own weaknesses discovered that he could help others eliminate theirs. The man who developed strategic thinking capabilities found that he could design systems that promoted strategic behavior in others. The man who built personal power learned to create institutions that would multiply that power across time and space. The cycle is complete, but it is also self-renewing. For the institutions that are built by strong men have the capacity to develop more strong men, who can build more institutions, which can develop even more strong men. The investment in institutional power pays compound returns that extend far beyond any individual's lifespan or direct influence. This is the true meaning of dominance in a soft world. It is not the ability to control others through force or manipulation, but the ability to create systems that elevate human potential and enable people to achieve objectives that would be impossible through individual effort alone. It is not the destruction of opposition, but the creation of such compelling value that opposition becomes irrelevant. The man who has traveled this complete journey, from the destruction of personal weakness to the construction of institutional strength, has achieved something rare in human history. He has become a force of nature in human form, a creator of realities rather than merely a responder to circumstances. He has proven that individual transformation, properly guided and consistently applied, can reshape the world itself. The soft world that once seemed so hostile to strength now bends to accommodate the institutions he has built. Not through force or coercion, but through the simple reality that his systems work better than the alternatives. They produce better results, create more value, and enable more people to achieve their potential. In the end, this is the ultimate victory. Not the defeat of enemies, but the creation of systems so superior that enemies become irrelevant. Not the accumulation of power over others, but the development of power for others. Not the domination of the weak, but the transformation of the weak into the strong. The man who began by destroying his weak self has ended by creating institutions that help others destroy their weak selves. He has become not just a master of his own edge, but an architect of edges for others to master. He has proven that the principles that work for individual transformation can be scaled to institutional transformation and, ultimately, to civilizational transformation. This is the legacy of the strong man in the soft world, not just his own strength, but the systems he creates to develop strength in others. Not just his own victory, but the victories he makes possible for those who come after him. Not just his own dominance, but his contribution to the dominance of human potential over human limitation. The weak self has been destroyed. The strong self has been built. The strategic mind has been developed. The institutions have been created. The legacy has been secured. The transformation is complete, but its effects will continue to ripple through time, creating waves of strength in an ocean of weakness, for as long as human beings value excellence over mediocrity and power over helplessness. In the end, the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, not just because he has eliminated his vulnerabilities, but because he has built something that transcends individual existence. He has created institutions that embody his strength, systems that perpetuate his vision, and cultures that promote his values. He has achieved immortality not through avoiding death, but through creating life that will continue long after his own life ends. This is mastery of the edge in its fullest expression, the transformation of individual strength into eternal influence, of personal power into institutional legacy, of temporal existence into lasting impact. The soft world remains soft, but within it now exist islands of strength that grow larger and more numerous with each passing generation, testaments to what becomes possible when human potential is fully realized and properly applied.